The kitchen door was slightly ajar. Just a thin slit of light like a fresh cut. And through that cut the truth began to seep out. Cold and sharp. Enough to make a marriage bleed. Ethan stood frozen. His car keys still hanging from his fingers.
Again,
listening to his wife
you're
rehearse
upset,
a
but you have to
breakup
listen to
like
my
she was
side of the
practicing
story.
lines for a play.
No, that sounds too
Claire's
weak.
voice trembled
The
just
instructions
enough,
are very clear.
breaking at carefully
Do not
chosen
deviate from the
moments,
plan.
while another
Ensure the
woman's
doors are
voice,
locked before
dry
you
and
leave the
controlled,
premises.
directed every detail, telling her to slow down, look away, breathe faster, emphasize the line that she needed space to find herself, then wait for him to collapse. They laughed, not loudly, not cruelly, but with the casual amusement of people who had just invented a game to pass the time. In that kitchen where Ethan had learned to make Claire coffee every morning. Where they once argued about paint colors. His pain was being scripted, not because of physical betrayal, not because of an affair, but because of a loyalty test. Ethan, 35, operations manager for a medical supply company outside Austin, was the kind of man people underestimated. Steady, quiet, dependable, never flashy enough to fear. He believed in systems, in plans, in the idea that if you followed the steps, things would hold. 6 years together, 5 years married, no children, one rescue dog named Milo, a single story house with a backyard, a life he thought was solid and unremarkable, not the kind of story people told online. Until that afternoon, a cancelled shift sent him home early. Unanswered texts raised no alarm. A black SUV in the driveway barely registered, and then he heard it. Claire practicing the words "I need space to find myself." Not as a confession of pain but as a draft being edited. Naomi's voice corrected her, coached her, reminded her to mention couples therapy as bait, to record his messages, his calls, his panic, to send it all to the group chat and compare results. In that moment, Ethan understood he was not a husband being tested. He was content, data, a performance for bored spectators. His heart slowed, not from calm but from instinct. The kind that activates when something vital collapses. He did not rush in. He did not confront them. He stepped back and observed. Because real power was never in the reaction they expected. It was in refusing to give it. He remembered the subtle changes, the comparisons, the quiet pressure, and he finally saw the pattern. He took out his phone and started recording. His hand steady, his mind already building a counterplan. Inside, Claire nodded along to instructions, unaware that her role had already been exposed before she ever stepped on stage. And when Ethan quietly turned away, what he carried with him was more than proof. It was a decision, one that would turn their game into reality and that reality into a lesson none of them would ever erase. The shock did not come from the words "I need space." It came from the way they discussed it, like an item that could be wrapped up, labeled, and passed around for amusement. Ethan stood outside the window, his shadow pressed against the wall like a dark stain. Inside, Naomi's voice rang out clearly, smooth and sharp like a blade long used to cutting. "Remember, say it and then stay silent. Do not explain. Let him panic. Men hate empty space." Claire answered with a small yes, like a student taking notes. And in Ethan's mind he could hear the imaginary scratch of a pen. Feel each heartbeat being turned into a prop. They talked about the text message first. It had to be vague enough to create anxiety. They talked about the phone call after. Let it ring twice before picking up. They talked about tears. If she could not cry, then she should think of something sad. An old lover forgotten. A loyal dog dying in the rain. Anything that would trigger a reaction. Ethan felt his throat go dry. Not from jealousy but from the precision of it all. This was not impulse. This was rehearsal. And Claire did not resist. She asked questions. She memorized. She adjusted. He looked into the familiar kitchen where the wall clock kept ticking. The second hand moving in perfect circles. Time flowing on. Indifferent. While a relationship was being sliced into neat pieces for a group chat. Naomi talked about rewards. If he truly loved her, he would do something big. A trip, jewelry, a promise. Men needed reminders that they had to earn women. Brooke laughed softly and mentioned a husband who had bought a house after a similar test. And that laugh chilled Ethan. Not because it was cruel but because it was normal. Too normal. He pulled out his phone. Started recording. His hand steady like a surgeon setting rhythm. Every word was stored, raw and unfiltered. Ethan knew this moment could never be erased. And from now on every choice he made would be guided by what he had just heard. Claire asked one small question. What if he did nothing? Her voice trembled. Ethan held his breath. Naomi answered instantly. Impossible. Men cannot handle losing their comfort. He will panic. Trust me. Ethan smiled in the dark. Unseen. Not in triumph but in clarity. They believed power belonged to the one who created reaction. They did not know real power lived in the one who could refuse it. He stepped back, away from the light. Inside, Claire began talking about how she would tell the story if it worked. About screenshots, comparisons, who was loved more. Ethan felt his heart grow heavy but his mind sharpen. A new structure was forming. Not to save the marriage but to measure whether it deserved saving. He returned to his car. Sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. Hands resting. Breathing steady. Outside, the world kept moving. People shopping. Laughing. Believing games like this only existed online. Ethan understood there were betrayals that left no mark on skin but fractured how a person saw the world. He replayed the recording once more. Not to hurt but to be certain. There was no misunderstanding. No twisted context. Only one truth. The woman he loved had agreed to turn his heart into a test. Ethan started the engine, the sound low and solid, and drove off without knowing the destination but knowing the direction. They wanted to see what he was made of. Soon they would, and when they did, no one would be laughing the same way again. The truth followed Ethan like a shadow. Not shouting, not shoving, just standing there quietly, waiting for him to turn back and face it. He pulled into an empty parking lot behind a diner that stayed open all day. Neon lights flickering across the windshield and breaking his reflection into overlapping fragments. He did not go inside. He needed a sealed space where his thoughts could run straight without interruption. The phone lay on the passenger seat. The recording inside it, one touch away from waking the pain. He did not touch it yet. His breathing slowed, deeper. The way it did when a system was about to fail and had to be stabilized. Ethan was used to keeping operations running through chaos, and he knew that if he reacted on instinct everything would shatter. But if he held order he would see the structure beneath it all. And tonight he needed to see the structure of his own marriage. He pressed play, the first time to be sure, the second time to analyze. Naomi's voice was steady and confident, Claire's voice hesitant but compliant. The laughter short and precise like punctuation marks sealing a finished plan. There was no coercion, no one being dragged along. Only agreement wrapped in harmless-sounding words. Ethan closed his eyes as memories lined up like files in his mind. The late evenings, the vague comments about feeling trapped, the quiet comparisons to other lives he had brushed off as harmless. Every piece slid into place. There had been no grand scheme from the start. Only small steps, whispered suggestions, nods of agreement, until the game took shape. He opened his notes app and wrote a single sentence. Do not confront, do not explode, let her perform, let the truth reveal itself. Beneath it he mapped out steps like an operations plan. Maintain normal routines, detach emotion from reaction, shift the conversation to reality. Money, the house, time, consequences. Ethan knew exactly what they were waiting for. Tears, frantic questions, promises, panic. They believed he was the kind of man who would cling to familiarity at any cost. Who needed approval to exist? That was their fatal mistake. He remembered the early days of his career, overlooked in meetings because his voice was not loud, yet always the one called when systems failed. Not because he shouted but because he saw what others missed. That had always been his power. The phone buzzed. A message from Claire asking what he wanted for dinner. Simple, familiar, as if nothing had happened. Ethan stared at the screen, hearing both the forced normalcy and the hidden anticipation beneath it. She was standing backstage, adjusting the lights, waiting for the scene to begin. He replied that anything was fine and he would be home a little late. His fingers did not shake, not because he felt nothing but because he had chosen his direction. His calm was not forgiveness. It was the silence before a structure was dismantled. He started the engine and drove toward the familiar street. Streetlights stretching into a line of irreversible moments. Ethan thought of Claire. Of the woman who once laughed with him in that kitchen and believed love was enough. And he felt a heavy sadness settle. The kind that comes from realizing someone you trusted had agreed to place you into a test you never consented to. When he turned onto their street, he was ready, not to fight but to observe, to measure, to see whether the woman inside that house understood what she was standing on. And when the words "I need space" finally came, Ethan would not be the man they expected. He would be the answer to the game they had chosen to play. That dinner began with a scent that was too perfect, as if someone were trying to use memory itself to cover a guilt that had not yet surfaced. Ethan stepped inside and closed the door so softly the hinges made no sound. Warm yellow light spilled from the kitchen, wrapping the room in a false calm. Claire stood with her back to him, stirring a pot, her shoulders tight. When she turned at the sound of his footsteps, she smiled the familiar smile, but her eyes lagged by half a beat. Just half a beat, enough to be a confession without words. She had cooked his favorite dish, not by accident, a meal she saved for moments when she wanted to pull him closer. Ethan felt the sharp ache of recognition, one part of him hurting, the other calmly logging the detail and placing it in the growing map in his mind. They talked about ordinary things. Ethan's work, an email Claire had received, the weather, sentences flowing smoothly as if nothing were fractured beneath them. But Ethan saw everything. The way Claire placed her phone face down, the quick glances when it vibrated, the way her fingers kept brushing her hair whenever the silence stretched a second too long. He nodded, asked questions, answered just enough. He was not acting, he was operating, keeping a system balanced while alarms screamed under the surface. Milo lay curled in a corner, unaware that his owner stood on opposite sides of an invisible line. Claire laughed a little too often, a little too loud, trying to fill the gaps. Ethan laughed back, lower, slower. In the light they looked like any other couple. But in Claire's head the script was already running. She was timing it, deciding when to push the climax. After dinner or before bed. How many tears would be convincing? Ethan knew all of it. Not because he read her mind but because he had heard other people write her thoughts for her. He cleared the table and washed the dishes like a considerate husband. Claire watched from behind, studying his movements, searching for cracks. There were none. Ethan was flawless, and that unsettled her. When he bent to open the dishwasher, the metal door reflected Claire's face. She practiced a faint frown, a soft sigh, a sadness calibrated just right. A brief rehearsal, discreet. She did not know Ethan had seen it. Without turning, without reacting, but seen it. Night settled slowly. They sat at opposite ends of the sofa watching a familiar show. Claire did not follow the plot. She was counting beats. Ethan watched closely, not the screen but the distance between them. A distance that had never felt so wide even while they sat so close. Ethan stood first, saying he needed to check a few emails. Claire nodded too quickly. She needed more time, more preparation, a message to Naomi that everything was on track. Ethan stepped into the home office, closed the door, and pulled out a folder he had prepared. Documents, copies, things that seemed lifeless yet weighed more than any apology ever could. In the living room, Claire exhaled, shoulders dropping like an actor stepping into the wings. She believed she still controlled the stage. She did not know the man she thought was her audience had already left his seat and was standing in the lighting booth. Ethan looked at the list in front of him, then at his own reflection in the dark screen. He did not see a man backed into a corner. He saw someone standing before a door that did not lead to shouting or begging, but to truth. And once truth is placed on the table, it does not need performance to exist. The words fell onto the dinner table like a blade dropped from above. No clang of metal, only a silence split clean in two. Claire placed a hand on her chest and took a breath she had practiced beforehand. "I think we need to talk," she said. "I need space to find myself." Every word was placed carefully, measured and controlled. In her mind, Naomi was nodding, Brooke was smiling, an invisible audience waiting for Ethan to fall apart. Ethan finished chewing the last bite, swallowed, and set his knife and fork neatly aside. "Okay, if that is what you need. Just 2 sentences. No raised voice, no trembling, no questions about why, no suspicion of anyone else." The answer landed so lightly that Claire thought she must have misheard. She blinked. "Okay, that is all you have to say." She waited. 1 second, 2 seconds. Waiting for panic, for grasping hands, for frantic questions. Nothing came. Ethan stood, picked up his phone, opened his notes. Then let's talk about the practical side. If we separate, the first thing is money. He spoke as if opening a short meeting. We need to separate expenses and freeze the shared cards to avoid complications. Then the house. We either sell it or one of us buys out the other. Either way takes time. Claire laughed, the sound cracking. What are you talking about? I did not say divorce. I just need space. Ethan nodded. Space requires a plan. Living together is not space. He scrolled calmly. Minimum timeline is a few months. During that time, each of us needs a separate place to live. The color drained from Claire's face. No, I do not want to sell the house. This is our home. Ethan looked around the kitchen. The warm light, the photos on the wall, the dog sleeping under the chair. You just said you were losing yourself here. He replied, I respect that. Respect means not clinging with emotion. It means preparing so you can leave properly. Claire shook her head. That is not what I meant. I thought you would understand. I thought you would fight for us. The truth slipped out, raw and exposed. Ethan met her eyes, calm to the point of cruelty. I am fighting, just not the way you expected. I am fighting for truth, for boundaries, for not turning a marriage into a test. He moved on to Milo. The dog, the care schedule, alternating weeks, shared vet costs. At that, real tears filled Claire's eyes. Not the practiced ones. Panic. She saw doors closing one by one. The house, the money, the dog, the safety she assumed would always be there. She reached for her phone like a lifeline. Ethan placed his hand on the table. Not touching her. Do not call anyone right now. This decision needs quiet. Claire broke down, crying openly. I do not want this. I just wanted you to care more. Ethan inhaled slowly. Caring does not mean kneeling. Caring means believing what you say and acting on it. You said you need space. I am clearing the way. In Claire's head, Naomi was shouting. Stop. Push back. Suggest therapy. She grasped at the last thread. What if we try couples therapy first? Just try. Ethan looked at her, a sad smile flickering briefly. Therapy cannot save something you are actively putting on the operating table. Therapy works when both people want to stay. You just said you want to go. Silence stretched. Milo lifted his head, sensing the weight in the room. Claire panted, shoulders shaking. This was not how it was supposed to go. No gifts, no promises, only lists and consequences. Ethan put his phone away and stood. I will move into the office tonight to give you space. Tomorrow I will send you a summary so we can review it together. Claire looked up, eyes red. You have thought about this before. Have you not? Ethan studied her for a long moment. No, I am just someone who does not wait for the house to collapse before looking for an exit. He walked away, leaving the table cluttered behind him. Claire sat there, tears dripping onto the wood, realizing the most terrifying truth of all. The game had become real, and the man she thought was the weakest was the only one cold enough to pull the curtain down before the stage lights even finished warming up. The next morning, Claire woke up in a house that felt both familiar and foreign, where every object stood in its old place but had slipped out of meaning. Ethan had moved into the home office the night before, quietly, without drama, just the soft sound of a drawer sliding shut and a small suitcase placed against the wall. The empty space he left on the other side of the bed was not large, but it was heavy. Claire stared at the pillow, cold without his warmth, touching it as if to check whether this was real. In the kitchen, Ethan made coffee the way he always had, steam rising, the familiar smell filling the air, yet no good morning was spoken. Milo circled them, sniffing, sensing a shift he could not understand. Ethan set the dog's bowl down, gave Milo a brief pat, then straightened up like closing a ritual. He spoke about logistics. He would be working late. He had sent Claire a summary of what needed to happen if they were separating. Not an order, a list. The way he spoke made Claire feel like she was sitting in a meeting she had not prepared for. Her phone trembled in her hand as messages from Naomi poured in, asking what happened, how he reacted, whether he cried, whether he begged. Claire read them with a racing heart, typed a few words, deleted them, typed again, then stopped. She did not know how to answer. Ethan noticed the phone but did not ask. He had learned that questions right now only created fog. Instead, he opened his laptop and did exactly what he had said he would do. Securing the shared accounts, freezing the cards at a safe level, transferring Claire the money she needed for expenses. Everything was clean, documented, justified, leaving no room to accuse him of control. Claire watched him like a stranger wearing her husband's face. "I did not think it would go this far," she said quietly. Ethan looked up. "You said you needed space. I believed you." The words were simple, sharp enough to cut through every excuse. She tried another angle. "I just wanted you to care more. We could go away somewhere. Change the air." Ethan shook his head. "A trip does not fix agreeing to turn my pain into a test." He did not raise his voice, but each word landed heavy. At midday, Claire called Brooke, her voice shaking, saying nothing was happening the way they promised. Brooke laughed nervously and told her to push harder, to make him believe she was really leaving. Claire ended the call feeling sick. For the first time, she saw what they called advice for what it was: contempt wrapped in sisterhood. That evening, Ethan came home late and placed several envelopes on the kitchen table. Copies of documents, apartment viewing schedules, a short handwritten note. He did not push them toward her. He simply left them there, placing reality on the table and stepping back. Claire read, line by line, each one a hammer blow. Her name where a signature would go. Dates, consequences with shape and weight. For the first time, she understood there was no safe exit from this game. She cried then, not on cue, not for effect, but because something fundamental had collapsed. Ethan heard from the other room. He did not rush in, did not hold her, not from cruelty but because he knew that doing so now would teach her that tears were a switch. That night, Claire knocked on the office door. "I am sorry," she said. "I was wrong." Ethan opened the door but did not invite her in. "Sorry for what?" Claire swallowed. "For listening to others instead of you. For treating your feelings like something that could be measured." Ethan nodded slowly. "Good. At least you are naming it correctly." Then he continued, his voice low. "But an apology does not erase what happened. It is only a starting point. If you want to stay, there will be conditions. And if you do not, I will not stop you." Claire looked at him and, for the first time, clearly saw the real power of the man in front of her. Not money, not anger, but the ability to stand still in the storm and refuse to trade himself for the comfort of a performance. When the door closed, Claire slid down against the wall, understanding too late that the man she thought was weakest had become the boundary. And that boundary could not be crossed with tears or promises. The truth was not revealed all at once. It was drawn out, like a blade hidden beneath a tablecloth, only exposed when the other person leaned too close. The small Italian restaurant on the old corner street, where Ethan and Claire had gone on their first date, glowed under warm yellow light that made everything feel falsely safe. Claire believed this dinner was her chance. She had cried enough, apologized enough, stepped back enough. She wore the blue dress Ethan once loved, tied her hair neatly, trying to carry the image of who they used to be. When Ethan arrived, he did not look around or hesitate. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her, composed like a meeting that had already been scheduled. They ordered food. Claire spoke about love, about confusion, about being influenced, about never wanting to lose him. Her words flowed soft and warm, like water trying to melt ice. Ethan listened without interrupting, without nodding, his eyes calm but deep, as if measuring the depth of a crack. When Claire reached her final plea, asking for one last chance, Ethan placed his phone on the table, gently, centered, not flipped over, not hidden, just there. Claire went silent, her heart racing, a bad instinct running up her spine. "Before I answer, there is something you need to hear," Ethan said evenly. Claire shook her head automatically. "No, I do not want to hear anything else that makes this worse." "Everything is already bad," Ethan replied. "Hearing it or not does not change the truth." He played the recording. Naomi's voice filled the space, confident and unmistakable, coaching breathing, silence, the mention of therapy as bait, the instruction to document reactions for comparison. Then Claire's own voice, quieter, hesitant, but agreeing, asking questions, following along. Short laughter cut through like thin glass. Each sound landed on the table between them, Claire turned pale. She covered her mouth, as if trying to stop a scream. Nearby diners laughed, unaware that a marriage was being stripped bare inches away. When the recording ended, Ethan stopped it. He said nothing more. Silence finished the job. You knew, Claire whispered, her voice squeezed thin. I knew since the afternoon I came home early and heard you rehearsing in the kitchen. Ethan said, since before your performance even began. Tears streamed down her face. Real and uncontrolled. Why did you not say anything? Why did you let it go this far? Ethan answered slowly. Because I needed to see how far you would go. I needed to know whether the woman I married would stop when she realized it was wrong. Or keep going for the approval of others. You kept going. Claire bowed her head. I tried to stop when you did not react the way they said you would. Ethan shook his head. You tried to stop because you were not getting what you wanted. Not because you understood how cruel it was. Those are not the same. She reached for his hand. Ethan pulled back before contact. Not harsh, just final. You say you love me. He said, I believe you believe that. But love does not turn someone's pain into an experiment. I will cut them off. Claire pleaded. I will do anything. Cutting them off is the minimum. Ethan replied, not because I demand it, but because you need to understand what they did to you and to us. The server brought the check. Ethan paid with his own card. When they stood to leave, Claire swayed, as if the floor had dropped away. Outside, the night air was cool. The city indifferent. On the drive home, Claire asked, her voice breaking, do we still have a chance? Ethan watched the road ahead. Lights changing from red to green. Maybe, he said, but not by going back. If there is anything, it will be built from the ruins. And I am not promising anything. Claire fell silent. For the first time, she understood that real power was not making someone fall apart. It was pulling the curtain back and letting the truth stand there. Exposed. Undeniable. The door opened into laughter. And Ethan stepped into the room like a question no one had prepared an answer for. The weekend gathering called a creative circle was being held in Naomi's spacious home. White walls, soft lighting, wine glasses arranged like props for a familiar performance. The women sat in a loose circle talking about inspiration, freedom, loving themselves. When Ethan appeared, the air froze in a single heartbeat. Claire sprang to her feet on instinct. Eyes wide, lips pressed tight. Naomi held her hostess' smile for half a second too long before it finally collapsed. Ethan did not ask permission. He walked calmly into the center of the room holding a tablet. So composed he almost looked lost. He greeted them politely and said he only wanted to share a short story. The words landing lightly but carrying weight. Naomi recovered her voice and said this was a private gathering. Ethan nodded. Private, he repeated, like the way you plan to invade my emotional privacy for entertainment. Murmurs rippled through the room. Claire stood rigid, her throat dry, the floor seeming to tilt beneath her. Ethan pressed play. Familiar voices filled the space. Clear and undeniable. Instructions on how to stay silent. How to cry. How to mention therapy as bait. How to document reactions for comparison. Soft laughter cut through like thin blades. Faces around the room drained of color. One woman covered her mouth. Another stepped back as if the sound itself could touch her. Naomi lunged forward, reaching for the device, but Ethan stepped back a single pace. His voice calm. Do not, he said, let it play. His composure made her stop mid-motion. When the recording ended, a heavy silence fell. Ethan looked around, his gaze resting on each face. How many of you knew about this? He asked. No one answered at first. Then one hand lifted slowly. Then another. Claire did not raise her hand. She stood trembling, a witness who could not retreat. Ethan nodded once. And how many of you have done this to your own husbands? A shift moved through the room. Two women exchanged guilty glances. Another stared hard into her wine. No more proof was needed. Naomi tried to recover, claiming they were only giving advice, trying to make women stronger. Ethan smiled faintly. Strength is not hurting someone else to feel valuable. Strength is taking responsibility for your choices. He turned to Claire. Tell them how it felt when the game did not follow the script. Claire inhaled, exhaled, her voice breaking. He knew from the beginning. And I still went through with it. I thought I was testing him. But I was really testing my own morals. Chairs scraped back. Some women grabbed their coats. Some apologized sincerely. Others turned on Naomi demanding explanations. The room fractured. Alliances snapping in real time. Excuses colliding and falling apart. Ethan spoke again, not raising his voice. I have sent copies to those who deserve to know. It was not a threat. Just a statement. Naomi shouted that he was destroying everything. Ethan shook his head. No, I am cleaning it up. He turned and walked out into the cool night air. Javier waited by the car, watching Ethan with a mix of awe and concern. Is it done? He asked. The part that needed doing is done. Ethan replied. His phone vibrated non-stop in his pocket. Messages and calls piling up. But he silenced it. In the rearview mirror, Naomi's house shrank away, its lights flickering like stars about to burn out. Ethan breathed deeply, not in victory but in finality. Behind him, Claire stood in a room emptying fast, realizing that consequences are not what come after a choice. They are the choice itself. Once the lights turn on and there is nowhere left to hide. Ethan's phone kept vibrating like a living thing trapped in his pocket. Thrashing for attention, he did not look at it. Not yet. The car moved slowly through the night, red lights stretching ahead like scars that had not healed. Javier drove without asking questions, because some moments did not need them. The silence was not empty. It was full. When Ethan arrived home, Claire was sitting on the front steps, not crying loudly, not calling his name, just sitting there, back straight but drained, like someone who had run too far and suddenly realized she did not know how to return. The porch light washed her face pale, her eyes red but painfully alert. Ethan stopped a few steps away, the distance deliberate, not to punish, but to keep both of them from falling back into old reflexes. What happened there? Claire asked first, her voice rough. She already knew, but she asked anyway, like a final ritual. The truth was spoken simply. Ethan did not embellish. He did not need to. Claire lowered her head. I did not think you would do that, she said, surprise and pain tangled together. You did not think I would stand up because you thought I was afraid of losing you. Ethan replied, you were wrong. Tears spilled over. I lost everything, she said. My friends, my reputation, maybe you. Ethan did not deny it. He did not confirm it either. He said what mattered more. You chose them first. Now you are living with that choice. She stood and stepped toward him on instinct. Ethan lifted his hand. Stop. The small gesture was enough. Access was no longer automatic. Inside the house, the air felt thick. Familiar objects stood still, witnessing a quiet shift in power that needed no shouting. Ethan placed his keys on the table and sat across from Claire. Now we talk about what comes next. Her eyes filled with fear and hope. I will do anything, she said. Cut them off. Apologize. Therapy. Whatever you want. The promises poured out fast. Ethan listened, then nodded slowly. Good, but not to keep me. To fix you. There is a difference. If you do this only because you are afraid of losing me, you will repeat it, with someone else or with me in another form. He began laying out conditions. Not like threats but like the minimum design so a structure would not collapse again. Cut off all contact with Naomi and everyone involved. No explanations. No private apologies. Block and delete. Final. Claire nodded quickly. Too quickly. Ethan watched her. Do it because you understand. Not because you panic. She breathed in and nodded again. Slower this time. Individual therapy. Not couples therapy. You need to understand why you let others write your voice for you. Why you needed validation that came from hurting the person closest to you. Claire pressed her lips together. I will go, she said. Full financial transparency. Every account. Every expense. Trust is not repaired with words. It needs light. She hesitated for half a beat. Then agreed. And finally, Ethan said, you take responsibility with the people you pulled into this. The families. The men who were tested without knowing. You write letters. You tell the truth. No excuses. Claire froze. Her face drained. That meant public shame. Exposure. Ethan did not look away. You were willing to document someone else's pain. Now you document your own truth to repair what you broke. Silence stretched. Then Claire nodded. Very slowly. Okay. She looked up, her voice shaking. And if I do all of this, we stay together, right? The question hung between them like a thin wire. Ethan stood and did not answer immediately. He went to the window and stared into the dark. Then turned back, his voice steady. I am not promising anything. This is not a bargain. These are the minimum conditions for me to even consider it. Claire collapsed back into the chair, tears falling but no screaming. She understood at last that love could not be forced with panic. It was a choice made again and again. In the light, without an audience, Ethan turned and walked toward the office. The door closed, not hard, not soft, just firm enough to say a chapter had ended. Outside, the city kept breathing. Inside, two people sat on opposite sides of a decision. No one knew the ending. But for the first time since the game began, the truth was no longer hidden. And sometimes that was the only beginning that mattered. Change did not begin with vows. It began with a silence that lasted long enough to strip away whatever was left. The first week passed like a storm without rain. Claire cut contact, truly cut it. Her contacts emptied, notifications went quiet, weekends erased. The house that once echoed with laughter felt hollow. Not from absence of people but from the absence of masks. Ethan watched from a distance, offering no commentary and no encouragement. He had learned to tell the difference between change and performance. Claire began individual therapy. She came home from the first sessions with swollen eyes and a clenched jaw, like someone pulled out of fog and forced to face a mirror. She did not share details. Ethan did not ask. Some things needed to be said elsewhere before they could be said at home. Apology letters were written at night. Not generic notes but letters with names, memories, and responsibility. Claire wrote, deleted, rewrote, correcting every line that drifted toward excuse. There were letters Ethan returned, pointing out where blame still slipped in. She nodded, swallowed tears, and started again. Each word was a step on ground that was no longer safe. Ethan continued sleeping in the office, not as punishment but because he needed space for himself. Nights stretched long as he stared at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe while memories surfaced without warning. The laughter in the recording, the practiced tears reflected in metal. Those things did not vanish because an apology was right. They needed time to settle. One afternoon the doorbell rang and Claire opened it to a bundle of replies. Some letters thanked her, some were angry, some were silent. She read each one and slid down to the floor as if gravity had suddenly increased. Ethan stood a few steps away. He did not comfort her and he did not turn away. He let her feel the full weight of what she had done. In the second month the therapist suggested a joint session. Ethan hesitated, not wanting this to become a ritual or a demand, but also not wanting to hide. The office was bright, the chairs facing each other. The therapist spoke plainly, saying Claire was doing the work, but Ethan was holding distance like a fortress, protective yet isolating. Ethan pushed back, speaking of self-defense, of no one having the right to demand an open door while wounds were still open. The therapist nodded, then asked a question that stilled the room. Was he healing, or was he extending punishment to guarantee he would never be hurt again? The question followed Ethan home, into the kitchen and into bed. He faced an uncomfortable truth. Power was not only saying no. Power was also daring to say yes when risk remained and taking responsibility for that choice. By the third month small signs appeared. Claire no longer searched other people's eyes for validation. She returned to things that had been hers before applause mattered. She painted again, not to show anyone, just to breathe. She joined a support group, listening to stories of those who had been manipulated and those who had manipulated. Not preaching, only learning. Ethan tried one small step. Eating dinner at the same table. Not polite small talk but honesty. He spoke about his fear, about how every kind gesture now triggered suspicion. Claire listened without interrupting and without defending. She did not ask to erase memory. She accepted living with it. There were good days and bad days. Mornings with laughter and nights when Ethan turned away because a fragment of memory surfaced. Claire did not chase him. She let the space exist and did not use tears to bridge it. That, more than any promise, caught Ethan's attention. One late evening Ethan stood at the office door with his hand on the knob. He did not open it right away. He admitted to himself that staying was not weakness. It was a conditional gamble. With clear boundaries and full light, he opened the door and said only one true sentence. We will go slowly, very slowly. Claire nodded. No celebration and no relief. Only understanding that this time every step had to be placed on real ground. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, a new structure was taking shape. Built not from vows but from repeated action. For the first time in a long while, Ethan no longer felt like he was standing before a stage. He was standing inside a construction site, where everything could collapse if anyone lied. It was frightening, but it was the only thing left that felt trustworthy. The ending did not arrive with forgiveness. It arrived in a very small moment, when Ethan realized the ring was back on his finger and he could not remember exactly when he had put it there. A year passed like a rough road with no clear signs. Some days bright, some days wrapped in fog so thick he could barely see himself. Ethan and Claire did not return to where they began. They built something else, rougher, slower, less romantic, but real. There were no smooth reassurances anymore. No promises meant to calm fear. Only difficult questions and answers that could not hide. Claire kept her word, not through grand gestures meant to impress, but through the dull consistency of doing the right thing. She stayed in therapy, kept financial transparency, took responsibility when questioned, and stayed silent when listening was required. She stopped seeking validation from other people's eyes and found it instead in quiet mornings making coffee alone. In evenings spent painting with no audience. In phone calls apologizing to those who had been dragged into a game they never agreed to play. Ethan did not forget. He learned to live with memory the way one lives with scar tissue. Some days it did not hurt. Some nights the smallest sound made his body tense. He spoke about it, not to accuse, but to keep it from rotting inside him. Claire listened, without defense, without explanation. That listening did not erase the past, but it laid solid ground beneath the present. They returned to couples therapy only after both were steady enough not to use it as bait or as a lifeline. There they learned to argue without humiliating, to stop before words became weapons, to admit fault without collapsing. The sessions were not always comfortable, but they were honest, and for Ethan, honesty was the minimum requirement. The relationships around them shifted. Some marriages collapsed under the light. Others were saved because the light arrived in time. Claire spoke in support groups about boundaries in love, not as someone preaching, but as someone who had been lost. She named what she had done, manipulation, and she named its price, loss. Some evenings they sat on the porch in silence. No need to fill it. Ethan looked at Claire and saw a woman different from the one who once practiced tears in the kitchen. Not perfect, but awake. He looked at himself and understood that real power was not controlling others, but refusing to let fear control him. One night Claire asked softly, as if afraid to break the air, if he would have been better off leaving that day. Ethan thought for a moment. Maybe it would have been easier. He said, but easy is not always right. He stayed not out of duty, but because he chose to see whether this change could last. And so far it was standing. The ring on his hand was no longer a symbol of innocence. It was a reminder that trust is not given once and kept forever. It is a practice repeated in the open when no one is watching. Claire understood that the ring could be removed again if boundaries were crossed. And it was that acceptance that gave it weight. Not every betrayal deserves forgiveness. Ethan knew that. Not everyone changes. He knew that too. But some people learn when the cost is high enough and choose to live differently every day. Claire spent a year proving she was one of them. Ethan spent a year learning that love is not about never being hurt. It is about deciding what you are willing to heal from together. For how long, and under what conditions. This story does not end with applause. It ends with a silence that carries weight. If you are listening and wondering what you would do in Ethan's place, say it. Would you leave or would you stay? If this story made you think about boundaries and trust, leave a comment. Press like if you want to hear more stories like this, and subscribe so you do not miss what comes next.